Hello and welcome to the Business of Story, where we explore how you can use storytelling to transform your business. I'm your host, Park Howell, and today's episode is all about effective communication, both the art and science of delivering a message that resonates. Our guest is communication expert and speaker coach, Laurie Schloff, who has helped leaders across industries refine their speaking skills to connect authentically with their audiences. Laurie and I dive into the critical elements of public speaking. They include vocal variety, pacing, and the often overlooked power of nonverbal communication. We explore how body language and eye contact, even on virtual calls, play pivotal roles in making your stories have an immediate and lasting impact. So if you are looking to elevate your speaking skills, connect more deeply with your audiences, and deliver your message with confidence, well, this episode is packed with actionable insights for you. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never seen a monotone speaker not crater on stage or during a sales presentation, except for one guy. That dude is comedian Stephen Wright, whose whole shtick is delivering novel story fragments through a hilariously boring demeanor.
A lot of people are afraid of heights, not me. I'm afraid of widths. When I was little in our backyard, we had a quicksand box. I was an only child, eventually. One time the police stopped me for speeding and they said, "Oh, you know the speed limit is 55 miles an hour?" I said, "Yeah, I know, but I wasn't going to be out that long."
So if you're not Stephen Wright and you want to make your meetings, presentations, and speaking gigs as persuasive and entertaining as possible, then I highly recommend you hear what Laurie Schloff has for you today.
Generally, when you're telling a story, you are feeling emotions. So you're going to be fascinating to watch because those emotions will usually, not all the time, start to appear on your face. But of course, I have clients who are saying a lot of boring things. What can I say? But they still have to look interesting. Like I just coached someone for an earnings call. I hate to say it, she can't tell a freaking story. She has to do it literally by the book. And how does she do it in a way that's interesting? Her voice and her facial expression.
As a sought-after speaker, coach, and consultant, Laurie has worked with leaders across industries, helping them craft messages that resonate because they're delivered with authenticity. Laurie is the author of the classic book, Smart Speaking, a book that actually caught Oprah's attention, where Laurie showed up as a guest speaking expert. She's also been featured on the Today Show. So whether it's pacing, presence, or the power of storytelling, Laurie knows that mastering your communication is indeed a game changer. In today's episode, we'll unpack her proven techniques that elevate both vocal delivery and nonverbal communication so you engage with your audiences and make sure your messages stick. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Laurie Schloff. Hello, Laurie. Welcome to the show.
I am so glad to be here. I admire what you do so much. And I think what we do is so complimentary. I'm very excited about being on your show.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. I mean, you and I met at the beginning of the year in a virtual session. It was a training session with some other people that we sat through for a couple of days in building your business and so forth. And we got to know each other there, and we found it really fascinating what you do in the realm of message delivery and helping leaders, helping marketers really own a stage, or it could be in that conference room, or it could be one-on-one with your people, and how body language and all these things that you train on are just as important as the content of the stories you're telling.
Mm-hmm. So I see it as really two dimensions. One is the message itself, the story, all the amazing things that you do. And someone could be very good at learning the story. And I mean, you've worked with thousands of people, so you see this and you see how some are better at the execution or the delivery than others. So, yes, on the other side of things. So, once they know the story, how do they deliver it? And we can divide delivery into component parts. Do you want me to share those?
Yeah, let's go for
Okay,
it.
so we can divide delivery into oral image, how you sound. And I told you I was on Oprah. She actually had me on her show. The show was called I Don't Like the Way I Sound. And she had me
How
on as an
how long
expert.
ago were you on Oprah?
That was in the 90s when she had her show.
Mm-hmm. And how
Yes.
was that? Tell us a little bit about the Oprah experience. That sounds like fun.
Sure. Well, I just thought maybe people would want to get to know me first in the sense of I was asked to be on Oprah because of writing a book. And in the 90s, you wrote a book and were published if you were going to be good on radio and TV. That was the whole deal. So a year went by after my book Smart Speaking was published, which I think is now considered a classic in the field. I am trying to ask some millennials to redo it because it needs some updating, because it was actually before social media, and it was before podcasts and all that, so I need to update the references.
Well,
And
and it was before the massive amounts of books that have been published, including a couple of mine out there. It seems like everybody has a book out there now, but
right,
you were unique in the 90s.
it was very difficult to get published, but guess what? If you got published, you got a good amount of money up front. So it's very different times.
So Oprah called to have you come on the show
Yes,
because the title was I Don't Like How I Sound.
she was putting together a show called I Don't Like the Way I Sound. My book had come out a year before. I was on vacation, so I only had one dress. That was the one dress that I ended up taking to the cleaners. And I said to the dry cleaner, "This dress is going to be on Oprah." And he took a picture of the dress and the whole thing. So I had no shoes, though. So the only thing I did in Chicago was shop for shoes. And the experience on the show, I would say I felt confident. It was a lot of fun. She had a few people on who didn't like the way they sounded. And Park, I have the distinction of curing a whiner on television. And it went something like this: Bob, show Laurie how you speak. Marlene, it's time for dinner. Laurie Schloff, what can you do about him? And then, Park, I had us analyze what is whining. Whining is actually your air goes out your nose, right? And you stretch out the vowels. So I said, Bob, what I'd like you to do, let's shorten the vowels and let's have the air go out your mouth, like Ronald Reagan or Marilyn Monroe. And he said, Marlene, it's time for dinner. And Oprah said, Laurie Schloff, that was great. So that's my dubious distinction. I cured a whiner on national television.
We're going to come back to the oral skills here in a second.
Yep.
Since we're diving back in your history a little bit, tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you got into communications coaching, especially around delivery.
Sure. I was always interested in a few things. One was helping people, because that's what we do in our businesses. Number two, I was always interested in communication and psychology. I'm still totally a communication geek. I love going to an airport hours early, just listening to people over. If there's a conversation going on, I'll purposely sit near those people to overhear them. So it's a certain fascination. And then, like you, I liked being an entrepreneur, though, like you, I also, had regular jobs at some point in my life. I got my degrees in speech pathology because corporate speech coaching wasn't really something I thought about, or there was only a few coaches in the whole country. So I got into the field in the 90s after working as a speech pathologist. And that technical background has helped me a lot in terms of being helpful to people with how they sound, and also people who are non native speakers of English who want to be more clear.
And why did you get into speech pathology?
I think it was the combination of what I told you. So interested in speech and communication, so interested in helping people, and interested in feeling, independent and creative. When in my generation, there weren't that many women who went into business. So that took a good decade. I had to mature a little bit before I felt entrepreneurial.
And did you, like maybe as a young lady or a girl, did you have any challenges with how you sounded or anything that triggered in you kind of, that reason to go into speech pathology beyond just helping people? But how about helping yourself?
Right. Well, one reason I went into speech pathology is because I had a high school love named Glenn, and his older sister, who was my role model, was majoring in speech pathology at Syracuse University. But so that is one reason. As far as I do remember this, you're kind of bringing back a memory, which is we had to kind of audition for something in the speech pathology department. And I remember getting very nervous. My speech was, this is a good example, my story was good, but I was so nervous, my voice became very tight. And I remember the professor bringing that up as something that she wanted me to work on. And now I feel pretty good that even if I'm very uptight, which isn't that common these days after all these years, I can still control my voice. I have a question for you actually, because I've always complimented you on your voice. Do you feel a sense of like good control over yourself vocally? Is that something you think about at all?
Well, no, I don't really think about it. Now, the first time I had any voice training was actually back in the ninth grade. I was a musician, I played the piano, and my mother really encouraged me to join the choir. And I thought, I don't want to join the choir. And I ended up joining the choir and had so much fun there in the ninth grade that I went on in high school. And for the next 3 years, I was in the choir, even the president of the choir at one point. But I'll tell you, Julie, my biggest thing was I had this really froggy voice that maybe you can still hear a little bit of now, but growing up, I had a really froggy voice. And so I was not a terribly good singer. I had the best teacher in my life, Dennis Behrens, who was the head of the choir, and he encouraged me to keep going. But he gave us voice lessons in the choir of how to breathe and speak from your diaphragm and how to use, some of the nasal tones or the throat tones. So that was really the one and only time. Because my voice, I was so self-conscious about the froggy part in the choir and that I would never be a soloist. I was a piano player, so I was an accompanist, but that's where I got my training. And honestly, I haven't really thought about it since. Maybe other input that I got or inspiration is I used to produce a lot of radio commercials as a young man in the advertising world.
So other
and so I got a
people-
chance to
Yeah.
work with really good talent. And these were
Yes.
funny radio spots. They were story-driven spots.
fun.
These people had to do character voices, and we were always
So
having so much fun.
fun.
And I think I watched them and how they did it. But
Right.
no, I never really did it myself.
I'm gonna, I think I can help your listeners learn what I do by complimenting you. I know you're a pretty humble guy, but another thing you do well in the oral image toolkit. So we said you have a nice voice, and you're just, you're lucky. You don't lose it; it stays
Well,
with
thank you.
You don't think about. The other thing that you do beautifully is fluency. Fluency is the smooth flow of words. Very difficult for a lot of people. They have a lot of interruptions, choppy speech, of course, the famous ums and ahs, which you are allowed. Everyone's allowed an or ah. If you don't have any hesitations, you won't sound that natural. But Park, you are very fluent. You have a smooth flow. And then the third thing you do, which is really the frosting on the cake, and I don't even know if you do this, and it's amazing, is what we call vocal variety. That one word in every sentence jumps out, and I'm going to get a little technical here. It jumps out through pitch. He's a great storyteller. It jumps out through volume. He's a great storyteller. Or a big mouth like me can get quieter. He's a great storyteller. Little hush hush. And then the third way, which is very expert, and you do this unconsciously, is stretching out the vowel in the word. He's a great storyteller. And I was just listening to your podcast, and you did that on the word long. So you don't even know you do it. Listeners, don't pay attention to this. He's the only one in the world who doesn't know what he's doing correctly.
Well, remember, Laurie, I've been at this for 40 years, the advertising world in one way, shape, or form, starting with producing a whole ton of radio commercials. And of course, I've got my podcast I've been doing for eight and a half years. And I go back and listen to some of those early shows. I'm like, oh my God, I sound horrible.
Really?
So it is practice, but I don't consciously think about it.
All right. But I want to say this. It's practice. However, it's practicing the right things. And that's why people need coaches. You can practice your tail off, but you could be practicing the wrong thing.
Let's do this then. Yeah. I'm a new leader coming up through the ranks, and as a part of my job, I am going to have to address the rank and file and my people and so forth. And I don't know, and I've never had any coaching. I have you come in to help me. What is one of the first things you do? And for any of the listeners out there that said, man, I would really like to work on my, the oral capabilities to sound a little bit better. What are some of the first things to work on?
Well, the first thing, the coaching experience is, as you know, a relationship. So truly, the first thing almost has nothing to do with teaching anything. So it has to do with learning how they see themselves. What feedback have they had from others? What is their goal? What is their career goal? And then, of course, so that's stage one. And then stage two is the actual coaching. So let's get into, let's say, the average person who sounds rather dull. So the new executive who is a little nervous speaking to his team, and he says something like, I have a really important announcement about quarter three. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. No one's going to fire him because of that. But how can we help him to sound confident and passionate? And that's when I'll teach him. I might say, I'll call you Joe. Joe, I want to teach you about vocal variety. Vocal variety is the ability to convey meaning, impact, and emotion through your voice.
So give us some examples.
And so let's take that sentence that you just said. You just said something like, we have a very important mission in quarter two. We have a very important. I'd like us to see how we can alter the meaning of that by emphasizing different words. So let's emphasize the word very. We have a very important mission. Try that, please.
We have a very important mission in quarter two.
Good. Okay, now let's do we. We have a very important mission.
So we're going to take the emphasis away from very and we're going to put it on we. So we look to the room and say we, and I might even add to that all, just to give that we a little bit more punch.
Right.
We all in this room have a very important mission in quarter two.
Good. So we don't want this to be overly deliberate, but for someone who's dull, very few people are actually, the word monotone is misused. Monotone means you talk on the same note like the early computers. Almost
or AI in some cases.
Almost no one is monotone, but many people are monopattern. They talk like this, and then the next sentence is like this, and the next one is like this, and the next sentence is like this. So again, I know in your workshops, you're constantly varying your rhythm. You're constantly trying to keep attention by being surprising and interesting. So for those folks who've worked with you, the cake is what Park teaches you. The frosting is what I'm teaching you, which is the delivery.
So we began this interview. You first launched into the oral side. We talked about Oprah, got a little bit about your background. We talked about oral or vocal variety, which I think is really interesting. What else do we have to pay attention to help us sound better?
So there's the oral image, and I know, we don't have forever. There's also the nonverbal, which is everything people see. So I'm going to say something that is going to make people think. Body language has gotten the most attention out of everything. you could pick up any popular psychology magazine. It's all about body language. But I do have to say, especially in this world where we're sending voice messages, we're listening to podcasts, oral image supersedes the importance of body language. That being said, there are certain things that you really do want to master in the nonverbal world as well. The most important thing is when you're in a virtual meeting, where the heck are you looking? And this is such a pain for some people, is the ability to converse while looking at the camera. And it's just something that has to be practiced. I'm still practicing it.
Yeah, it really is difficult because we are so used to, and I would say it's probably in our DNA to look at the eyes of the person who is talking to you and their lips. I mean, I'm always amazed at how much we all lip read and we don't even realize it. So when people during the pandemic had a mask on, how much more difficult it was, at least for me in settings, to be able to understand them. I had to listen even more closely because that little body language of the lip read, I was missing out on.
Right. And you're reminding all of us that, gosh, we're in this small real estate virtually, and our face is being looked at. In my book, this was years ago, I wrote about the chronically pleasant look. You have to look pleased to be there, which you do 90% of the time, which is great. But many people don't. Females do have an edge here. Females in general tend to be more facially expressive. And for people listening, it would be slightly widened eyes and slightly upturned mouth. There's actually 4 levels of smiling. I can't go into them on an audio podcast because it wouldn't make any sense. But
maybe it would. Let's do that. Let's paint that picture. That's what we're here for.
Oh, okay.
Let's
paint
the picture in their brains.
Please help me out.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's 4 levels.
Okay,
of
slightly.
smiling.
All right, your lips are closed, but slightly upturned at the edge.
So I always think of that as kind of like the Joker planning some deed, mouth closed, slightly. How do you do that without looking like, geez, she's sinister or something's up?
Well, it's supposed to make people feel like you're pleasant. So again, It's chronic. How do you want to, if you're speaking, at a funeral, maybe, it's okay to look sad, but in general in business, you want to look approachable and pleased to be there. And you got to master that. As we age, our faces get kind of longer. We're just not as cute. It's just simple as that. How can we tolerate toddlers? Because they're so adorable with their cheeks, despite the fact that they just ruined your wall with crayons. So we've got to compensate for aging, because we don't look as lovable, by doing these things on purpose. So the second one would be teeth showing a little bit.
With a smile?
Yep. That's the second level.
Mm-hmm.
The third level is the bottom teeth showing a little bit. And
so you got a little bit bigger smile.
And the fourth is the biggest possible grin you could give. Yeah. And there is some research that people can tell a phony smile too. So see if you can incorporate the smile into your regular life authentically.
Yeah, you got to be feeling it, right? Because they can even pick it up on camera and on a Zoom like we're on right now.
That's true. But here's where our two fields really intersect. Generally, when you're telling a story, you are feeling emotions. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be fascinating to watch, because those emotions will usually, not all the time, start to appear on your face. But of course, I have clients who are saying a lot of boring things. What can I say? But they still have to look interesting. I just coached someone for an earnings call. I hate to say it, she can't tell a freaking story. She has to do it literally by the book. And how does she do it in a way that's interesting? Her voice and her facial expression.
So how do you coach people differently, or maybe you don't? Say that, like me, a lot of my training is virtually now, so I am online a lot, all the time. And then I'll do, some speaking engagements and be in person more often now than, coming out of COVID and so forth. How do you coach it differently if someone is a leader is going to be on screen all the time versus in front of people?
It's a really important question to ask. In fact, I'm working now with a scientist who is trying to raise money for her life sciences company, and she's doing half of her stuff, actually more than half virtually, to investors, but also has in-person meetings. So we have to take that into account. So let's take into account something we just talked about, which is, where do you look? This scientist has to be really great at looking at the camera when she's virtual. But then I taught her a whole other technique for in person. And it's not that easy for me as a coach, Park, because I'm virtual. So
Mm-hmm.
the technique is called roving face contact. I'll say that again. Roving face contact. She wants to look at a different face for every phrase she's saying. So now I'm looking to my left. Now I'm looking over at the corner of the table. Now I'm looking at the edge of the table. Now I'm looking to my right. For every phrase I say, I'm looking at a different face. And again, knowing your experience and your success, Park, I think you probably do this naturally, but most people do need to be trained.
Well, and that's one area too, Laurie,
Yeah.
that I really worked on, especially when I first started doing a lot of keynote work. I was nervous,
Yeah.
and I would find myself planted in the stage or roving too much. I was letting that nervous energy come out too much, and it was watching other really good presenters. Jay Bear, a friend of mine who is a very, very good keynote trainer,
Nice.
speaker, I watched what he would do, and I realized I needed to slow down so I wasn't pacing the stage and do what you're talking about. You try to pick out a person and talk right to them, and then move to the next one and talk to that person.
Beautiful.
And go back and forth like window wipers,
Beautiful.
windshield wipers.
Yeah, yeah. And it's human nature. What do we tend to do? We tend to look at the people who look most pleased to see us.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I think both of us can say, based on years of experience, just because someone looks, they're nodding their head doesn't mean they love you. And just because someone looks serious doesn't mean they dislike you.
Yeah. That's very true. And sometimes you'll be speaking to an audience that just is kind of a dead audience for whatever reason. They aren't giving you a lot of feedback, and you think that you are dying on the stage, only to, after the program, they come to you and say, that was one of the most amazing things I ever sat through. And you look at them and go, and sometimes I'd even say, wow, I hope the rest of the audience felt like that, because they all just seem to be very reserved. And they got, no, that's all right. That's just how they show up day in and day out.
This is a very important lesson for listeners, is make it about you doing a good job. And yes, of course, there are things you can do for connection. That's why we love audience involvement. But don't overread your audience. It's actually one of my least favorite questions I have to share. My least favorite question is, how do you read an audience?
Is it even possible?
Well, there's many people in my field who believe that, yes, you probably can read some micro or very small behaviors. Certainly, if there's unconscious things people are doing, like leaning forward. I mean, certainly there's things like, which you get all the time, laughing or having an audible reaction, to something that you say.
Yeah, and the one thing that I do too, Laurie, is if I've got that audience that is hard to read, I stop trying to read them. Or if it's that audience that I feel like I'm not connecting with for whatever reason, given the body language I'm getting back from them, I will just go into I am going to do the best job in service to them as best I can, and let the cards fall where they may. And usually, very, very rarely will I have an audience, primarily they're attorneys, it seems like. They're like,
wow.
oh, okay, well, thanks very much. That's too woo. I could never use it. But mostly, it's like, wow, that was fantastic. And it's just really hard to read that on the spot from the stage to make sure you're really connecting.
Right. So we're in agreement on that, which is not the most common opinion of coaches. But it is up to us. We can't depend on the audience to help us be good. Right?
Right. So what else can we do? You've got the oral image, how you're sounding. You've got the nonverbal. We've talked about the facial expression. We've talked about eye contact.
I know. I'll tell you what comes up all the time in terms of oral image. which is speed of speech. So your listeners can guess at this one. Which is preferred, a slightly faster rate of speech or slightly slower rate of speech?
I think it's faster.
It is faster. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially given our day and age where everything is just constantly coming at us, if we are plodding along or sound like that to our audience, their brains are like, come on, man, let's get with it. I got other stuff to do.
Oh, and you'll love this technical reason. The brain can absorb like 500 words a minute, but the mouth is not so skilled. Even the fastest mouths are going like 250. So you have all this space. Now, are there exceptions? Of course. If I'm giving a chemical formula to people who know nothing about chemistry, well, I better slow down. Anyway, so the technique we'll practice is called the 1-2 technique. It allows time for listeners to absorb your thought, but the thought itself should be spoken at a good speed. But you do need to pause. In fact, you need to pause in order to live. What do I mean by that? When we pause when we're speaking, we're actually taking in a new inhalation. People don't think about that. I better pause in order to live, but we do it naturally.
To be able, yeah, breathe. And you said earlier when you were presenting your story and you were nervous how your voice got really tight. And what
Yeah.
happens? We stop breathing, don't we? I've had that happen to me. I'm much, much better at it now. But when I was first starting out, I would talk and I would talk fast. I forget to breathe, and then I'd lose my voice, and it would dry out, and I would have to literally
Yeah.
stop, take a breath and a sip, and like, dude, chill out, man.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you early in your career you observed yourself and then you made all these great corrections. So I think the tip I'd give to listeners based on what you just said is if you're just starting out or you're in a situation where you're nervous, don't have like 90-word sentences. So a great way to begin is, "Hi, how are you?" How's it going today? Nice short sentences so you have the chance to take a breath. But let's try with your address and phone number if you want. We're going to pause for a count of 2 in between, well, wherever it makes sense. So feel free to reach out to me. My cell is 617-571-0944. That's a special case, right? Because I want people to be able to write it down. I've really got to control my pauses, even though I'd love to speed up. Okay, you want to try giving your number or any contact information?
Yeah, okay. You're welcome to reach me at my mobile I'll use the old area code of 555 639 2755.
Good. I was able to write it down. 555-639-2755.
Well, and what I think about is when I'm giving that out, I'm picturing that person writing it down.
Good. Oh, that's
You
a
know what I
great
mean?
technique.
Yeah, visualize it. So you're kind of hand delivering then that information to them if you really truly want them to write it down, or if it's in a training session and I know I'm delivering them some new content that they really haven't heard before, I will deliver it once very slowly. I'll go off, maybe share a quick little story to demonstrate it in action. Then I'll come back and I will repeat what I told them first, the training. I'll pick that up a little bit more, maybe pepper that with its own story to show it again in action. And then the third time I will rapid fire it on them.
Whoa, I'm just loving your methodology. It's so strategic and so natural. And I think that's a very winning formula. You've trained yourself at this point over many years to the point where it's so authentic. It's not like something you're very deliberate about. But guess what, everyone? It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort to be natural and comfortable and effective.
Well, what I found too,
Yeah.
Laurie, that has really helped me, and I think I've really come to appreciate this in the last 5 years, is when you are coaching, and you're in the coaching business, of course, with folks helping their delivery, me in the storytelling, or if you are trying to help educate anybody on anything, I've learned that if you can tell stories that are authentic to you, that you've experienced, that you have seen in action, it might not even be your story, it's a story you heard, but that story helps underscore your point. It takes away the expertitis that we all that are really good at what we do. It takes that away and say, look, I'm not just spewing a bunch of facts from a textbook to you. This is what I've seen. This is what I've experienced. And when you tell those stories from your own unique place, they can't help but be authentic.
Beautiful.
And I think then that emotion comes through when you do
Beautiful.
that.
I have a quick one about speed. So I worked with a female lawyer who came to see me because she felt she talked too fast and everyone was telling her that and they couldn't get the information. And I said, well, what do you think is behind it? She said, my clients are poor and they're charged by the hour. So I figure if I talk fast, they'll have to pay less. And I thought that was the sweetest reason I ever heard for speaking fast.
That really is great. You never hear an attorney say that.
Never. That's maybe why it stood out.
Yeah. Every attorney I've worked with is like, come on, man, let's
Exactly.
get going. You already told me that 5 times. I got it. Let's move on to the
She's a
next
gem.
Tell us about, and you don't have to share the name to protect the innocent, where you got a coaching client in and you thought, oh my goodness, this person is a train wreck right now. They've got a big heart, they got a lot of knowledge, they can go places, but they're a train wreck, and how you were able to transform them into really, owning that stage, be it online or off.
Wow. Gosh, generally when I meet my clients, they are motivated. I'm trying to, well, I do have a funny story where I had to keep a straight face. So a guy was working for, I guess I can say it because it's such a big company, General Electric. And he was promoted from the plant where he could curse every sentence. And he said, you got to effing help me. I effing have to start talking corporate, and I effing don't know how. You got to help cure me of my effings.
He was a World War III of F-bombs, huh?
And I said, oh, this is going to be a good one. All right. So he was in my office. So I just did, a clicker or something every time he said the F-bomb. And that didn't work at first. I thought, am I going to have to get electric shock? So, no, he did progress over time. So he went from like 3 F-bombs per minute to 1 per minute. And then he landed in the corporate office, and I think he pinched himself. He became his own coach. Kind of crazy. But of all the things to be written in the Wall Street Journal, I happened to mention this story to a reporter, and that was the one paragraph they had about my work, was that I cured people of the being an effing cursor. Go figure.
Laurie Schloff,
It's
defusing the F-bomb
exactly.
speaker. Huh?
Well, my name, I guess, has 2 F's in it. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, there you go. Who are some of the people or some of the big companies that you work with over the years, or have worked with over the years?
Thank you so much for asking. I just finished a great gig with Iron Mountain, and they are a $1 billion company that does storage of stuff. Companies need to put their stuff somewhere. And I loved it because it was so international, Park. It had to be virtual. One team member was in South America, one was in England, one was in Massachusetts, and one was in Australia. Can you imagine the scheduling? So we did 4 groups. We somehow managed to. I think the person in Australia, of course, probably suffered. It's probably like, 11 at night. And then each person worked on being influential and high impact individually. So that to me is a perfect kind of coaching situation where you have a team, best practices, and then you work individually. I love doing that because then you can customize it a bit to each person.
And will they bring to you a presentation that they have to make or whatever, and you have them sort of audition it to you, and then you go, okay, let's break this apart,
Yes.
and then you really start working on their delivery?
Yes. So, for example, I'm working with a couple of people now who are trying to raise funds One has a 2-minute presentation, one has a 15, another has an hour presentation. And what we do is we look at how can it be improved? How can your delivery be improved? A general a general rule with your scientists and engineers is, would you cut the effing thing in half first?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
can relate to that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then we work on oral image, nonverbal relationship with the audience, handling questions. I love what I love best about the application of the techniques to a particular event is I'll get a text. Oh, it went so great. Thank you so much. My boss said it was the best ever. So it's very rewarding when you help someone for a specific gig.
Well, and it ups their confidence, doesn't it? I mean, when you're in there and you help them perform, because you think about it, really, every presentation is first and foremost performance art. You have to win them over to get your audience to trust you, to feel something, to have some sort of emotion in it, even if it's the most boring, dry financial reporting you're going to do back to them. There's a certain amount of performance art in there, and that's kind of what you do.
Yeah, I absolutely. So again, thinking of it like a cake where the message, the story is the cake, and then people can't see your character, your soul, your emotions. So they're only going by how you come across visually and how you sound. We don't really have that much to judge someone on, especially if we don't know them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, final question.
Yeah.
What are the three biggest mistakes or hurdles that speakers have to overcome, and what can they do to do that? So a listener could leave this today with some actionable tips right now.
At a certain point, focus less on content and more on connection. Yes, we want you to know your stuff. We want you to know how to tell that story, but at some point it's about how you're connecting to the people listening to it.
Yeah, because even if you have the best story in the world, but you stand up there very monotone, or as you said, mono-patterned, you are going to bore them and they're not going to listen to your great story.
Right. And maybe another tip is kind of about us, the combination of a great story and great delivery. What could be better?
Yeah, but how do you get there? So is it just practice? Is it practice in front of the mirror?
I,
And what should someone be looking for?
I think you need a good coach, however that is. Obviously, you and I love working with our clients, but you need to make sure you're learning the right things. So I have something I may have shared with you called the Presence 26 Toolkit. So
Oh,
26
what is
tools.
that?
Well, 26 tools in oral, image, nonverbal, including use of slides and interactive techniques that over the years I've sort of have proven to be very, very helpful to clients.
And so this is something someone can go to your website and download and use?
No, they need to come to me.
Oh, okay.
No, but I
They'll
know
hire you to take them through it.
I'm always happy to do an initial consultation.
Where could people find you for that? I believe you had mentioned to me earlier that you would give them a 30-minute free consultation
Absolutely.
just to get acquainted and talk about what struggles they may be having.
Absolutely. So what I did do, I don't know how you want to work it. They can email me, or better yet, I did send you my calendar,
Yep.
and people can just sign up for the 30 minutes. No pressure whatsoever. I love getting to know people, hearing your story,
Mm-hmm.
and how adding to your story through great delivery could be helpful.
Yeah, and we'll put that link in the show notes. So if you would like a free 30-minute consultation with Laurie, and I highly recommend
Oh,
you take her up on that. That's very generous of you, Laurie. Appreciate that. But we'll have that link in the show notes.
wonderful. Well, this was
All right.
great. I think we're a very good combination. The hot dog and the mustard.
Now, which one's the hot dog? Which one's the
I'm the
mustard?
mustard.
Okay. All right. Throw a little relish in there, and we got something.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy that we got acquainted earlier this year. You're one of those great people in my life in 2024, and
Thank
I'm
you.
happy you came on the show today. Thank you so
Uh,
much for taking the time.
so grateful. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining me today and for sharing this episode with anybody you know who would benefit from Laurie Schloff's advice. If you could also do me a huge favor, I'd appreciate it. And that would be going to iTunes and leaving us a rating and review. It just simply helps us get found out there in the noisy, cacophonous world that we all live in. I hope you will join us next Monday when successful startup entrepreneur Katie Richardson, now an executive business and life coach, shares her powerful system called the Vital Framework that will show you how to lift the drag out of your business and life and help you achieve what she calls parabolic growth. So you're going to want to join us for Katie. She's amazing. Hey, I'd like to say thanks to Caden Howell for editing our show, Marissa Hill for community development and marketing, and of course, Darius Holbert for our amazing custom theme music. And man, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And when you do come back next week, until then, I want you to remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is a story you tell yourself. So make that one epic. Thanks so much for listening.